The battle over abortion rights continues. This week, a bill to write Roe v. Wade into law was blocked by GOP-led filibuster. President Biden had called on Congress to pass legislation that would guarantee the constitutional right to abortion after the leak of a draft Supreme Court opinion that would overturn Roe v. Wade. However, the 51-49 vote was almost along party lines, with Democratic Senator Joe Manchin joining Republicans in rejecting the legislation. It provided a stark display of the nation's partisan divide over the landmark court decision. The vote promised to be the first of several efforts in Congress to preserve the nearly 50-year-old courtroom. Joining us today is Stephen Billy. He is the executive director of the Charlotte Lozier Institute. It focuses on science and statistics related to pro-life issues. Worth mentioning, of interest to our viewers, he grew up in Concord, worked in the Trump White House as well. Stephen, thanks for taking time. We appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely, Ben. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
We know Justice Alito cited a study from your group in that draft opinion, and I want to get to that in just a second. But first, as a local guy who has now found himself in the middle of the biggest court case of the last year, at least, if not the last decade or so, what do you think of the reaction that has happened over the last week or so?
Well, it's a long ways from the high school jobs at Carowinds and Concord Mills, that's for sure. But what I've been excited about the last week, being in the pro-life movement and with the news that we've seen, is that people are talking about the issue. They're finally coming to the realization about how extreme American abortion laws are compared to internationally, but also just the impact that abortion has had on our nation. Even Bill Maher recently mentioned, these are common sense things that he has just never heard before. And it's because the news hasn't covered it. So it's been an opportunity to get a lot of information out, and it's just been a very exciting week.
That said, we know that according to the most recent polling, most Americans support upholding Roe v. Wade and some for it, roughly to a 2-to-1 majority. Do you feel like that's overstated? How do you feel about the idea that this might not be, if it follows through in the next month or two, this might not be the most popular decision, which, by the way, I'm a big believer that just because you shouldn't legislate or pass laws or pass court opinions based on popularity, we wouldn't have necessarily gay marriage or other things if we did it based strictly on popularity. But that said, what do you think of the fact that a lot of folks are very, very polarized about this, and according to many polls, that they don't want this overturned?
Well, I actually think that the poll you're citing, that the American people don't want Roe overturned, is fundamentally flawed. When you dig deeper into that, most people don't understand, because it has been reported, it hasn't been talked about, that Roe v. Wade allows abortion up until the moment of birth. And the American people overwhelmingly reject that position for our country. Poll after poll shows that the American people do believe in common sense legislation. They do believe in common sense restrictions on abortion. The extreme position of abortion until birth is not where the American people are. And so you can look back for over a dozen years. Marist has run a poll on these issues that shows consistently over 70% of Americans believe in limitations on abortion. The idea that Roe v. Wade would allow and does allow abortion up until the moment of birth, that's not what the American people believe in.
But honestly speaking, though, where is that happening? Because you're talking about regulations happening and people supporting regulations, and I think most people would totally agree with you. Yeah, most people think there should be regulations, and where is it happening up until to the moment of birth?
Well, the Senate just this week voted on a law that would make sure that all across the entire country, state laws regulating abortion would be overturned. They'd be pushed to the side. Laws that would deal with informed consent of women, so they know what the true risks of abortion are. Parental consent laws would be pushed to the side. And the Senate Democrats, thankfully it failed, but they voted for a bill that would allow abortion until birth at any time, any place. And that's the position that the Democrats have right now. That's the position they want for the entire country.
But Stephen, that's my point, is that that's just a proposal and it failed. That's not the law of the land right now. I want to get to the study that Justice Alito cited, because it certainly, the study that you all did made it seem like the U.S. was an outlier, and you sort of touched on that a little bit. Are we an outlier based on your all's studies?
Absolutely, we're an outlier. When you look across the entire world, we're one of a handful of countries that allows abortion up until the moment of birth. And to your point, Colorado has recently enshrined that into law. Connecticut has recently passed a law that makes sure that abortion until birth is allowed. The mayor in Chicago, Mayor Lightfoot, has said she wants Chicago to be an abortion oasis. The governor in California has said that he wants California to be a abortion sanctuary. So the fact that abortion until the moment of birth isn't happening, that's not true. It is, and the Democrats are pushing for it. And when you look at us on an international stage, that's not where the rest of the world is. There's only a handful of countries that allow that. It's America, along with North Korea and China, and a handful of others. And if you look at Europe, 47 out of 50 countries in Europe actually limit elective abortion prior to 15 weeks. Over half of those countries in Europe limit elective abortion prior to 12 weeks. That's what Mississippi put forward in the Dobbs case, a 15-week limitation. That's what the Supreme Court's deciding right now. And it's important to keep in mind that if the Supreme Court leaked a draft opinion does hold, overturning Roe doesn't ban abortion in our country. Overturning Roe would allow the American people to have a voice in the policy decisions around abortion. It would make sure that their elected officials, their governors, their state legislators, their congressmen and senators are the ones that are deciding that. It's not the unelected judges at the Supreme Court based on science from 50 years ago.
It would be more legislative, which I think is a point that I think a lot of people see as valid. But you mentioned Europe, though. But Europe, I mean, they permit abortions beyond 15 weeks under a very, very, very liberal, broad range of exceptions, no?
So the laws on the book limit elective abortion at 15 weeks or earlier for 47 out of 50 countries. What you're talking about is enforcement of those laws, whether they have exceptions or how broad they allow those exceptions to be read. That's the kind of policy that the American people don't get a say in right now because of Roe v. Wade and because of the Supreme Court. So if Roe is overturned, if the leaked opinion does hold, the American people are going to have a chance to engage in that policy. They're going to tell their state legislators, this is what we believe our state policy should be. These are the exceptions that we believe we should have. These are how those exceptions should be enforced. All of those discussions can happen. We can find consensus state by state. What California looks like isn't going to be what North Carolina looks like, isn't going to be what New York and Alabama look like, and that's okay. But the people have not had the opportunity to engage in that kind of policy discussion. And the reality is the rest of the world is having it. And right now, because we haven't had those policy discussions for the last 50 years, we're in the ranks of China and North Korea, allowing abortion up until the moment of birth.
Still, I think overall, the trend around the world is a shift to more loosening restrictions on abortion laws. And I think that would make America sort of an outlier in that way, in that we're going a bit in the other direction. That's it, to the point you were just making about letting the states make decisions on their own and things like that. So would you say that you are against then what a lot of folks say is coming, and that's a national ban on abortion? That you would be against that then, because it's not then up to the states?
No, well, I'll push back a little bit on the trend internationally. Abortion law internationally has been stable for at least the last dozen years or so. There hasn't been a widespread trend to increase in abortion access across the entire globe. But to your point, I believe that there is a role for federal legislators to play in the abortion policy. And I think that they will have a role to play, and they will act on that. The Senate Democrats right now are trying to push forward abortion on demand up until the moment of birth. They want every state law, every state regulation banned. And they want the national law to be abortion up until the moment of birth. There will be a role for federal legislators to play, but a lot of the work will also be done in the state levels, and I think that is appropriate, and the American people deserve to have their voices heard through their elected officials, whether at the state or the federal level.
Just real quickly, because I got to get into one last question real quick, because it's one that I think a lot of people struggle with, who feel conflicted, or they feel either way about this. And do you feel like there are good people on both sides of this issue? And if so, why is there not room for compromise?
I think there is room for compromise. I think the fact that the American people's voices haven't been able to be heard because of Roe v. Wade is what has driven so much division. We've never been able to let the American people find consensus through the democratic and political and policy-making process. When we have that, we can find consensus in the states. I think a lot of that division will dissipate. I do believe there are people from both sides coming from this with good intention. I don't believe that the abortion industry is coming with good intention. I believe that they see a profiteering and a corporate aspect to all of this. They continue to put forward misinformation, and it puts lives at risk, not only the unborn child whose life is ultimately ended by abortion, but the mothers who face physical and health and mental health complications from abortions. So there is room to find consensus. I believe we can do that, and with the overturning of Roe, we'll be able to move forward in that policymaking and decision-making process based on the American people's voice.
Stephen Billy with the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Listen, it's not an easy issue to talk about, and you probably made a few enemies, and you probably made a few new fans as well, especially up in Concord, I imagine. Stephen, thanks for coming on. We do appreciate you talking about a tough topic.